Hey folks, I thought I'd do something interesting here. Back in April, I recorded an interview with Shauna and Dorothy Dobbie of Canada's Local Gardener magazine and podcast. They put the interview up on their podcast website, but I recorded the whole thing in Zoom in video. And so I emailed them recently. I said, hey, can I put this up on my YouTube channel? And they said, sure. We had a great conversation. They initially wanted to interview me about, growing things in a northern climate and that sort of stuff, but we ended up talking about all kinds of things under the sun related to gardening, and we had a great conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. And if you're interested, there's some information in the description box of this video on how to subscribe to Canada's Local Gardener. There's links to, they actually did an article on me that just came out in the most recent volume. And I've written some articles for them actually on different topics like how to grow garlic and so on and so forth. So, it's a good read. It's worth subscribing to. Maybe check that out. Take a look at that if you're interested. But otherwise, enjoy the interview. I hope you like it. I had a great time talking to them, and I think we're going to do it again this spring.
Hello, I'm Shauna Dobbie.
And I'm Dorothy.
And our guest today is Greg Outen.
Hello.
Now, Greg, you are the primary person at Maritime Gardening?
I'm the only person. I'm the host of the...
I was trying to say that gently.
I'm the host of the Maritime Gardening podcast and YouTube channel. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that is how I found you. Greg is on our editorial board at Canada's Local Gardener as well. And you're here to talk to us today about extending the gardening season.
Yes.
So to speak. Okay. So let me ask you, first of all, where you're in Nova Scotia, where exactly are you?
Oh, my longitude and latitude?
No. Are you near Halifax or?
No, so I'm near, if people think of the famous landmark in Nova Scotia called Peggy's Cove, which is this big rocks and water and stuff like that. I'm about a 10-minute drive from Peggy's Cove. So
you're on the South Shore.
Yeah, but I'm very close. I'm between Peggy's Cove and Halifax. That's okay. A good way of putting it. I'm not right on the coast, but I'm like 2 kilometers from the coast. So I'm very, you can smell the ocean some days here. Wow. All of the climatic effects of the ocean, the fog and the unseasonable cold and the unseasonable heat, it's abnormally warm in the winter, but not sunny, and abnormally cool in the summer, but not sunny.
Okay, so I have a burning question for you, which came from speaking to a fellow in Churchill, Manitoba, who gardens. Yeah. And believe it or not, he's been growing potatoes and things, as well as having a greenhouse. He grows things outdoors. But the people who gardened there before him said that they really benefited from the minerals in the sea air, those warm sea breezes that would come off the bay. Is that true?
I don't know how many minerals end up, certainly where I live. I'm far enough from, there's no salt coming out, raining down on the soil here. If you are right next to the shore, I imagine there would be some salt, but really what we get here is fog. Because in the summer, the sun doesn't come out till like noon in the summer.
Well, you've met Ian, who is the president of our company, and he comes from Jersey, and he says they plant all their potatoes right near the seashore because of that. He also says that they get some benefit off the ocean. So I was really curious about that.
Well, they probably also use seaweed.
Yes.
Which I use. I can, there's lots of places they can go here. I've even got videos on seaweed because there's so many questions about it because people think you're just like putting salt on your garden, which you're really not. There's the salt. The seaweed doesn't have salt in it. It has some salt water on it.
Yeah.
And usually you're not ripping it off the rocks. You're taking the dead seaweed that's been cast up high on the shore by storms and stuff like that. So I tend to pick a day when it's been raining and it's been raining on a bit and that sort of thing. So it'll have a smell that you associate with the ocean. So psychologically you think it's salty, but really a biologist friend of mine told me that's basically like iron and other compounds, other chemical compounds that you associate with the sea. The seaweed smell, but really there's not a lot of salt in it at all. I use that. And actually with potatoes, there was an episode of, the CBC show Land and Sea.
Yeah.
They actually, if you look, I think you can find it on YouTube. There's an episode about some guy Newfoundland or Nova Scotia or someplace out east here who planted his potatoes with seaweed. Like he would, dig a hole, put the potato in, throw some seaweed on it, put the soil back. I do the same thing and it works really, really well. So I think there's something special about seaweed that's particularly good for potatoes, but I don't know how much, goodness is coming out of the sky. Maybe acid rain is coming out of the sky. I mean, if you're near the shore, you get a lot of rain, and if you're getting rain, it's acid rain, and potatoes like acidic soil, so that might be something to do with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I learned a lot about you from the little bit of, of contact we have. When you speak of potatoes, that was one of the most thrilling things I've heard all year, honestly, was, did you know, Mum, to start a new garden, you can just sort of mow over what's there.
Yeah.
Don't care what it is. Don't care if it's weeds or grass or whatever. Throw down some potatoes, cover it with inches and inches and inches of mulch, whatever kind of mulch you have. And that's in the spring. And then in the fall, you dig up your potatoes and you've got a garden underneath.
Is that what you do, Greg?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if I'm claiming a new space, I mean, if I've got a garden already claimed, I might stick them a couple inches in the ground because you just get better results. I might bury them wrist deep. But yeah, if I'm don't have to do this so much anymore because I have a 2,500 square foot vegetable garden. I'm kind of at my limit for what, and I'm getting everything I need. I'm growing my garden for food, and I've got about as much food as I want to get out of my property. But yeah, if I have a new piece of property, which is just weeds or grass or whatever, and I want to turn that into a garden, I colonize that soil usually so let's say you just have some grass. A lot of people just have a lawn. Mow it down, put the potatoes right there, and then you put about anywhere from 8 to 12 inches of some sort of mulch. Hay is a good one, but I've used leaves, I've used seaweed, I've used lots of different things. You want to put enough mulch on top of the potatoes that it's still going to be there. It has to be, it can't all have broken down 90 days in, because your potatoes take anywhere from 70 to 90 days, depending on the variety, or more, depending on conditions and so on and so forth. So the potatoes have to stay covered. But what happens is that the potatoes will root in the soil. The mulch, remember, the potatoes aren't going to do anything for about 2 weeks. They're not going to do very much. They're going to slowly send roots in the ground for a couple weeks, and then they're going to start sending eyes up, and it'll find their way through that mulch, no problem. One advantage of this for early planting is that you've got some time. It's going to take the potato, let's say, 3 weeks to emerge, maybe even more, because you're putting like 8 to 12 inches of mulch on. So if you get a couple of frosts in the interim, it's no big deal. The soil's warm enough. It's above zero, let's say 5C, give or take. And even if the ambient air overnight gets down to zero, because you got that thick, nice sort of like wool blanket on top, they're going to be all right. So if you time it right, I mean, a rule of thumb is you plant your potatoes when you see dandelion flowers. The first dandelion flower on your lawn, when you see that, you're totally safe with potatoes, even though you still might get a frost. Under that mulch should be all right. But what happens is that mulch smothers and kills out the grass. If you rake up your grass on your lawn, all the grass dies underneath a pile of raked up grass, right? If you mow your lawn. So all the grass dies that's underneath the potatoes. They're going to root into the soil there. All that grass becomes fertilizer. It gets broken down by soil organisms that live there, right? Yeah. And so they feed your potatoes. All of the roots, you think of your grass sod, it was like 4 inches of pretty good roots. All of that becomes like beautiful, dark organic soil over the course of that particular growing season. I've got videos showing before and after the results and that sort of thing, right? So in the, August-ish, when you're digging these things up, the potatoes are grown, and all of that sod is this dark, rich soil, and it's ready for next year to plant whatever you want to plant there, carrots, tomatoes, whatever. So it's a great way to make a new garden, especially like later in the season when you've planted everything and you're running out of energy and you don't know what maybe you want to do a little bit more, but you don't want to work too hard. You can very easy. I got a video where I say how to make a potato garden 4x8 in 6 minutes. So in 6 minutes, and I got this sort of silly sort of music going, but in 6 minutes, I make a 4x8 potato garden using that approach.
Okay, so how do you hill the potatoes, or do you have to?
You don't hill the potatoes.
So you get a big crop?
Yeah, you get, anywhere from 6 to 10 potatoes per seed. I even have a video called "You Don't Need to Hill Potatoes." So,
I've heard that.
So here's what's happening. You got the potato, and then you've got the eyes coming out of the potato, and you've got the new potatoes growing out of the base of those eyes. Now, because you've got the mulch, the reason you have to hill potatoes is because
to create roots.
If you don't have what am I trying to say? If you don't have your soil covered, so most people conventionally, you just have bare soil, right?
Yeah.
Now, all my gardens, I mean, people should know, your viewers should know, all of my gardens are mulched all year, all the time. The soil is never bare. But if you do things conventionally, you just have bare soil, right? People sort of love the look of beautiful bare brown soil. So you hill them up, and you're hilling them up because as the potatoes start producing, they'll start popping out of the soil, and you can't have them exposed to the sunlight. So you have to hill them up. And also, it produces more water and keeps the roots happy and that sort of thing. But when you have a mulch on top of the potatoes, as those new potatoes start appearing, the mulch just goes up because it's sort of interlaced together. It just rises, above the potatoes. Potatoes are rooted in the ground. They're getting all the water they need. Because you've got a mulch, there isn't the usual kind of evaporation that would normally happen, right? Because water runs along soil particles, and it evaporates from the soil to the air, and it gets drawn along the soil particles in that way, what you would call a soil solution. So by putting the mulch on top, you're sort of like putting a lid on a container, right? It still breathes, so the plant is getting the plant roots need air just as much as you or I need air, but it still breathes, but you're preventing the kind of evaporation that would happen with bare soil. And because all of that mulch can sort of just rise up as the potatoes start forming, the potatoes don't get exposed to the sunlight and turn green and become, toxic and that sort of thing. So yeah, you don't need to hill them.
That's brilliant. I've got some guys out here. I can't wait till I'm going to send this to them and say, now listen to this and tell me what you think. Because I don't know, would it be different here where we've got such a lot of clay in the soil? I don't know. I got to find this out. This is really cool.
I've heard this before, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I got the idea from, I think it was Jeff Lawton, sort of Australian permaculture guru. And these guys are using this approach in Australia, New Zealand, places like that, especially Australia, where they have a shortage of water. And they developed all these techniques for growing things, potato-like things. I mean, they're growing sweet potatoes, the things that can handle the heat they have there. We've got potatoes that are more adapted to our cold climate here, but the same approach works.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's amazing. Okay, we haven't even begun to talk about extending the season yet.
Well, sure we have.
Well, we did just a tiny bit.
Planting potatoes early, yes.
Yeah, that's right.
You have hoop houses and all that crazy stuff, and you garden in the winter?
Well, technically, yes. So it's not sunny here. So you probably couldn't have a word, even though it's not as cold as you're in Saskatchewan, right?
Manitoba.
I'm in Toronto.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, geez, I couldn't have got it more wrong. But okay, you're in Manitoba and Toronto. So in both of where you are, it's colder in the winter than where I am.
Yeah.
But where both of you live, it's sunnier in the winter where I am.
Mm-hmm.
Because of my proximity to the coastline and the fog and all the weather coming off of there, right? It's rare we get a sunny day from dawn to dusk, and there's a lot of days where it's just fogged over for half the day, so you're just not getting the kind of sunlight that would heat a microclimate of any kind, whether that's a greenhouse or just a little dome or even a little cloche or what. A cloche is like a little bell type shaped thing. But so do I garden all year round? Yeah. So I picked my last parsnips just a few weeks ago. I think I even made a video of it. And I picked my last carrots just a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
we do that here.
They're not growing through that period though. They're just stored.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So they were in the ground and they're underneath a little plastic dome or, polyethylene dome, but they're not growing, they're just not freezing.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, I've done experiments here where I keep kale in the ground and all that sort of stuff. It really doesn't grow in the winter here. It just hangs on, right? If you affect I'm sure if you put enough time and energy into creating an extremely well insulated, but we don't get the hours of daylight. It's just, and we don't get sun. Even if the sun, you might have like, sunrise to sunset might be 9 hours a day. You're going to get so little decent sun during that time on so many days. You might have one sunny day a week, and the rest of the days are so cold that even though, it's so. Yeah, so I'm out in my garden all year round, but in terms of extending the season, I'll tell you, I can't stand transplants, starting them, growing them, and so on. Now every year I mess around with it. So I got a handful of tomato plants in a window upstairs. I planted them, I don't know, maybe 10 days ago. One of them is growing, the rest of them aren't. I did an experiment this year because I read somewhere that putting cinnamon on the soil will keep it from getting moldy. That doesn't work.
No, hydrogen peroxide.
Yeah, I'm going to try that next because yeah, 3 of the ones with cinnamon have mold on them. Anyway, so
maybe you started with moldy cinnamon.
Maybe I started with moldy cinnamon or moldy soil, right? So I just thought I can't stand doing transplants because you put all this time and energy. I've tried 1,000 different ways to grow them, and I'm not saying it can't be done because people do it. But you have to really be focused. Once you grow the transplant, then you have to harden it off. And then you can't put it in the ground too early because if the ground isn't warm enough, the roots will be shocked by it. And you could even like you stunt or harm or even kill a plant with the soil. Even if the temperature is warm enough and you're past the last frost date, if the soil's still too cold, you could really harm a plant by planting it. And I just decided I want to just direct seed everything. And I'm living in a place where people live and die by their transplants. I thought, well, how can I direct to seed everything? Well, if I put a little, microclimate over, whatever it is, a dome, I have little sort of boxes. I've got all kinds of different, even I use what I call plastic squares. It's just a wooden frame about 4 by 4 with a piece of polyethylene over it. And you just put that on the, see-through, just put that over the soil. And it allows all of the sun's heat to affect the soil, but it doesn't dissipate. You're creating a tiny layer of ambient air over it, right? So I start everything. The last middle of March, generally speaking, is when I start sowing seeds in my garden. Not everything, right? But like the toughest, most invincible things, which for me is lettuce, spinach, and this year I'm trying.
Yeah.
I'm going to just hold on a second because we're going to stop for a little break and Ian's going to tell us a few 10 neat things.
Okay.
Now we just take a breath.
Is this like a sales sort of thing? Like, hey, buy this.
No, he tells us about today. It's about pigeon poop. He takes things
tomorrow. Yeah.
From our 10 neat things.
We have this newsletter that we do. Been doing it for years. It's 10 neat things about something.
And so
he'll
today
just pick a few and read them.
He picked a pigeon one, and he's talking about the pigeon poop, which is a very interesting topic.
That's where they used to get saltpeter for gunpowder.
That's right.
Oh, like during the war, they used to refine it out of that, right? Gunpowder.
Well, the king used to have like the nobody could buy and nobody could sell pigeon poop except the king at one time.
Right, because of the need for it.
For the gunpowder.
Okay, we're going to come back in just a second, and you're going to tell us more about
the cloche, which is basically, or
about using a cold frame essentially is what you're doing, but it's a lot bigger.
Because we saw that in Flin Flon, remember?
Okay.
Do you know where Flin Flon is, Greg?
Flim Flam? I know what a Flim Flam man is.
Flin Flon, Manitoba. It's a mining town in northern Manitoba.
Right. Northern Manitoba, and we saw a beautiful garden there. But anyhow. Okay. All right, we're back, and Greg is just about to tell us more about essentially it's a cold frame, isn't it?
Well, I would call it various forms of portable microclimates. So when I first established my garden, I read about cold frames, which are in one place. They're static, right? You build the cold frame, and that's where your cold frame is. And then whatever you're growing in your cold frame, you either got to pull it out and move it somewhere else, or let it grow there. And if I evolved from the cold frame, which I didn't like because you can't really do crop rotations. I mean, remember with vegetables, there's a pretty substantial argument for the practice of rotating crops. If you plant the same thing in the same place year after year after year, you run the risk of depleting that soil in some way in terms of nutrients, but also inviting in very crop-specific pests to that place. They'll lay their eggs there that fall, and then you can get into problems. So I thought, instead of doing that, why don't I just have little, either it could just be like an old window you lay on the ground. It could be a dome that's
just directly on the ground.
Yeah, so some of my domes are, let's say 4 by 8 and a foot high at the peak. Some of them are just glass windows that I just stick on the ground. Let's say I wanted to plant some spinach in a section of my garden. You put a window down a week before you want to plant the spinach, let that warm the soil, right? And then you plant the seeds, and as soon as the seedlings are touching the glass, you take it off. And for spinach is so tough, it can freeze and thaw out overnight and keep going, right? So it really depends on the plant. But I would say I use a variety.
Do you use the black plastic, or because I've seen that done? No, why?
No,
you can't see it.
You need the light to get through to warm up the soil, right? So you're trying to get a seed to germinate.
Yeah.
If your the black plastic attracts heat to itself, and to some extent the black plastic will, through conduction, will conduct heat to the soil. There might be a degree of convection heat going to the soil. When you have clear plastic, the sun is shining on your soil, which is dark. Remember, your soil is dark, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sun's shining on your soil, so all of that incredible energy from the sun, when you think about the difference between a light bulb and the sun, all that radiation is bombarding your soil and heating it up. So I've played around, and I found that you can get a lot more heat in your soil by just using clear plastic and letting the sun shine on the soil. But also, when you're trying to get seeds to germinate, once they poke up through the soil, you want them to see sun. You don't want them to be in darkness. They won't, right? So another advantage of doing it that way is that your seedlings, you don't have the problem with a transplant where you have to harden it off. They're getting full sun from day one. I think I might even have a video with that name, full sun from day one, so that you don't have to harden them off. They're getting full sun, right? From the moment they emerge from the soil. They get all that advantage, all of that energy, right? Their roots are going into the real ground. Another advantage is, you think about a transplant, you're growing it indoors, 20 Celsius room temperature.
Yeah.
They've been in 20 Celsius 24 hours a day, no wind, no extremes, no up, no down, no this, no that, right? Just no cold, rain, no nothing, right? As opposed to having something, even when you've got it under the protected environment of a dome, where I live, it's still getting below 0 at night here.
So what works better, glass or plastic?
Glass is better, but it's harder to come by. It costs more. It's heavier. Right? I got some of these like wooden boxes. So for things that I can move, some plants hate being transplanted. Like lettuce and spinach is a good example. Lettuce doesn't mind being transplanted at all. You can pluck a lettuce plant up and move it somewhere. You pluck up a spinach plant and move it somewhere, I'll lay you 9-to-1 odds that spinach plant is going to bolt. Spinach hates being moved, right? So depending on what you're growing, if it's like right over my garden right now, I'll plant something like broccoli, and I'll plant it just under a 3x3 box with plastic on top. When I initially made those boxes, I had old windows that I get out of someone's trash on the top. Well, they weigh like 50 pounds, right? Because it's glass, right? They're heavy. So I found myself taking the windows off and just putting 6 mil poly over them, that you can get a big roll of it at a hardware store because it just weighs less, right?
Yeah.
I'm not even sure. I'm certain the glass is more insulative. It's clearer. I think the glass does a better job, but it's more convenient. It's cheaper, easier, more convenient, easier on the back, all that sort of stuff to use plastic, like wood. Wood, the thing has to be heavy enough that it doesn't blow away, because it's insanely windy here too. It can get up to like, I don't know, 100 kilometers an hour, so we get hurricane force winds here sometimes. But
so
yeah,
you use all this
or
to
use whatever you can get, and use if you see a window in someone's trash and you want to save a few bucks, use that. But I wouldn't go out and buy it. Absolutely not.
So you preheat the soil and you start your seeds in preheated soil.
Yeah. I mean, if that's in the event that the soil is frozen, right? Like a few weeks ago in March, I was planting some spinach.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had to put domes over the soil because it was ice.
Mm-hmm.
Here we don't. It's a weird climate here. We don't have a layer of snow that just accumulates over the course of the winter and then reduces over the course of the spring. We will have a week here in Nova Scotia in the dead of winter, like let's say end of January, where it warms up to +8 and rains for 3 days and all the snow disappears.
Yeah.
And then it'll drop down to -15, -20 Celsius, and the soil just turns to ice, and then it'll snow on top of that icy soil, and so on and so forth. So oftentimes when I'm planting my spinach, I'm putting a thing over to make the soil thawed. Maybe the first 3 inches of the soil thaws. I'm planting spinach, but it's ice from, if you go down 3 inches, it's ice all the way down for another foot.
Well, why would you plant your spinach in that then, though?
Because the soil's because I'm putting it in a microclimate, the soil is going to continue to thaw. It's going to continue to thaw all the way down, and the spinach doesn't mind. It's going to take a week.
Okay.
It's going to take a week to germinate anyway. So during that week after I've put the seed in, it's going to get another inch and another inch, right? So that the thawing of the soil, and again, I'm doing this in March. So, things generally speaking start, unless it's the worst year ever, tend to start thawing out here in April, right? So I know that's going to happen. So I'm just getting a bit ahead of schedule, right?
Okay.
So it's just to get the spinach, and I don't plant all my spinach at that point. It's just to get something started early, right? And it can work for anything you want to plant. You can plant it a little bit earlier under a microclimate. I think the rule of thumb is that you can break whatever your rules are for where you live, you can break those rules by about a month, right? You can move things about a month ahead.
So what do you do with something like tomatoes? Do you plant your tomatoes in pots?
No, I plant them directly in the ground outdoors.
So how do you keep them warm? With the same sort of method?
Because they need a certain amount of heat to germinate.
Soil to be quite warm, right?
I do the same damn thing.
We've got a guy out here called Mr. Tomato, who, by the way, he discovered seaweed and he made a whole business out of it, made himself a fortune selling seaweed to the garden centers and all over North America. He called it Sea Magic.
You guys were already using it, right?
I'm using his supplier in Nova Scotia now. We give seaweed away to people, but who subscribe to the magazine. So there you are, folks. If you want to buy the magazine, maybe you can get some free seaweed from us.
There you go.
A little free ad in there.
Maybe I should buy one.
He had another product called Cozy Coats. And it was a plastic cloche, right? Well, it was sort of a round thing that when you filled with water to keep to create a microclimate for early starting. Have you tried that?
Oh, I've seen them though. I imagine they work really well.
Yeah.
No one's offered to give me some for free, so I haven't tried it.
Well, Brian sold the business, so I'm not sure he has it anymore.
Maybe, okay.
But I could see that, it would be insulative. So I could see it totally working. I mean, it wouldn't last forever. You would run the risk where I live, even till right up until the beginning of June, and sometimes even in the first week of June. I have a goldfish pond in my backyard. I get ice on the pond at night, right up until first week of June, despite being in zone 6A, right? Just because it's just so strange here, right? It really depends on if the weather's coming out of the north and off the landmass, right? It'll be unseasonably cold. And if the weather's coming off the ocean, it'll be generally, when you're still in the cold part of the year, it'll be unseasonably warm. In the summer, it's the opposite. If the weather's coming off the ocean, it cools right down, right? And if the weather's coming off the land, it gets like crazy warm. So it's
zone 6A. Wow, I didn't know it was that.
It just doesn't get that cold.
Yeah,
that's why.
That's like those great big trees.
The Canadian zone has to do with it has to do with a lot of things, but the fact that it doesn't. What's the coldest it'll get there usually?
Oh, like minus in the low 20s, negative
minus
20. Yeah, if you get minus 20, maybe minus 25 or something like that. But that would be like really the coldest. This winter was exceptionally mild. But I mean, it's important to note that your zone has nothing to do about your growing conditions.
No.
Your growing conditions are about, like my mother lived in Alberta, Edmonton, Alberta, zone 3A, right? and her tomatoes would always be ripe before mine. And I'm in zone 6A.
They need heat.
And it's because they get sun every damn day, all day.
Yeah.
Almost 24 hours a day of sun, right? So they just get so much good sun, right?
That's the advantage of being here in Manitoba too.
That's the advantage. And the disadvantage slightly though is that the tomatoes will get sun scald.
Well,
Really?
they will if it's too direct. Yeah. They like a little bit of shade. So there's a little good with and a little bad with every condition in Canada that you can come across.
Absolutely.
Except in Vancouver.
Or Victoria.
Yeah, they seem to have it all.
Right, it's the most expensive place to live.
I was reading that you're really into permaculture. Was that just about the potatoes, or do you do everything, without having to till the garden?
Everything. I bought this house in 2011. We had another house. I moved from a different part of the province. I had a garden, a sizable garden in my old house. When I bought this house, I had a bigger property. So, the garden always gets bigger every single year. And there was one winter where I was just like looking for stuff to watch on YouTube. And I just came across this video of a guy talking about permaculture. And then that guy was compelling, the argument he made, right? He said, look at the forest, it grows, no one waters it, no one fertilizes it, no one tills it. Everything's happening just fine there. And there are ways you can copy the way that works in a garden, and you can have a very low maintenance garden and a high productivity garden, just copying the way a natural system works.
Yeah.
And I was compelled by that. So I just started reading literature on that. So I read all the master works, Sepp, Holzer, what's his name? Dave Holmgren, and the actual book. I'm forgetting the name of like the most recognizable name in permaculture who wrote Permaculture 1. Bill Mollison and Dave Holmgren wrote Permaculture 1. I read Ruth Stout, the sort of focal.
Have you heard of this Ruth Stout, Mom?
No.
It's an amazing woman.
Like, she didn't call it permaculture at the time, but she was doing the same thing. She was just copying the way natural systems work.
Yeah.
Right. Stuff grows and then it falls to the ground and it decomposes into the ground, and then new stuff comes up. And I mean, the challenge for us as gardeners is we can't have everything just overwhelmed with weeds, but there's ways to adapt and make use of the way things happen in the natural world to make it a lot easier. I don't know how scalable it is for agriculture.
Well, they are doing that actually, Greg.
Yes.
We talked to a gardener in Alberta last year, not a gardener, a farmer, who says that they're, drilling is killing. No, tilling is killing. And drilling is the way they go now. So they they inject the seeds into the ground that is covered with the detritus from the detritus from the previous year. And I'm doing that on my lawn. I mulch the leaves because the trees obviously wanted that nutrition back.
You leave mulched leaves on the lawn?
Yeah. I just make sure they're well. I cut them up with my lawnmower.
Yeah, just run over with a mower.
Yeah, exactly. The same thing with the garden itself. Dad used to do that, Shauna. He would take the spring, and instead of going in and cutting up all those stalks and all that back-breaking work, he would simply go over it with a lawnmower, and then the stuff would disappear in a couple of days. It was great.
That's kind of the same. So that's the
same idea. And,
yeah. So, and it's ideal for the home gardener because you throw all that. So every fall, I mean, this is the main way I employ permaculture. The main way I employ permaculture in my garden is that just like in a natural system, the soil is never exposed. It's always covered with something. I might move a little mulch back to get seedlings started because
because I was going to ask you about something like as fine as carrots. How would you deal with that?
So it really depends on what you're trying to grow and how well it can get up through that stuff. So some things can get up through it, like a potato can get through a foot of hay, no problem. Asparagus can get through. So some things can just get up through. Other things are smothered by it, just like a lot of your, the reason keeping everything. Like a lot of your traditional weeds really can't contend with the mulch. Some of them can, but a lot of things can't contend with the mulch. And just like some of those weeds, things like a carrot can't do it. I found like if I put like an inch of seaweed, parsnips can get up through it.
Yeah.
I've even planted parsnip seeds in the fall and had them come up in the spring through the mulch. So some things are kind of like I've got an entire garden full of Egyptian walking onions, and I mulched that last fall,
Those
and
those
they're all
fabulous.
finding their way up through it. But yeah, something like a carrot or whatever, something really fine like that. You just move the mulch aside. You make a row about 2 inches wide.
Yeah.
Expose the soil. You want the soil exposed anyway because it's dark. It's going to attract heat to itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just get your seeds in there, and then once the plant's about 6 inches high, it's got a reasonably not a tender stalk, but a sort of more woody sort of. Then you move the mulch back. And then you stop watering and weeding your garden all summer long. I don't water my garden in July. I don't water it in August. I don't, it would take an extraordinary event, like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of the rain. And even then, like let's say we've gone 3 weeks without rain, I'm looking at the plants. If I come out in the morning and they're back up, I don't water it. If I come out in the morning and they look like, oh God, I don't know if we can do it today, then I'll water. But that's, I don't have to do, wow. There are years where I don't have to do that. Now, remember, I'm in Nova Scotia and we get rain here, right?
Well, that's a question though. I mean, when you get
hold on. Everybody has a question, but we really have to take
She's
a break.
The boss.
Oh.
Okay. Dorothy, you were going to, you had a question before we went to the break.
I do. It's a burning question.
Okay.
It has to do with all that mulch and a lot of rain. Do you not have trouble with the rain? Do you not get soggy soil, cutting out the oxygen or something like that under the mulch when it rains day after day after day?
Not where I am. And I mean, it's a rainy place where I am. It's especially this time of year. I mean, it rains all the time. I was supposed to go away fishing last week and I had to cancel the whole thing because it rained for about 7 days in a row. I thought I was almost started building an ark in the backyard.
We haven't had rain yet, so I'm waiting.
So in my backyard, I mean, so I'm 2 kilometers from the ocean. I'm in a peninsula on the North Atlantic. And the majority of the soil here is clay. It's clay and rocks. My backyard, when I built this thing, it was a weed field growing out of clay and rocks.
Really?
Yeah. And clay holds on to water, right? Now, mind you, all my beds are raised a little bit. Some of them are at grade. That's not entirely true, but most of my beds might be 2 inches above grade, just that. I find the higher up you go, you start paying a price as the plants can't get to the water that's in the ground. But yeah, I don't find there being any, I mean, you've got fungi and stuff like that, or fungi, but that's all the stuff you want there, right? So, I mean,
yeah. No, the only thing that we run into is soil compaction. The soil gets really soggy and then there's no oxygen, so then the plants will die. So that's an issue.
When you keep everything mulched, soil compaction stops being a problem. Okay? So I'm going to explain why.
Yeah, I get it. Go ahead.
When you've got bare soil, okay, every raindrop is a tiny jackhammer pounding on the ground, right? In the winter, you've got the weight of the snow bearing down on the soil. When you've got mulch on your soil, you've got a little bed mattress, springy thing, right? So the rain, the energy of the rain when it hits the mulch layer, it's not compacting your soil. It's just getting absorbed, sucked into that. It's never drying. And that's the other thing. When you don't have a mulch, you got rain compacting the soil and then sun drying it out. So you've basically got like a cement factory going there, right?
Yeah.
When you've got the mulch, it doesn't dry out, or it takes a very, very, very long time for the soil to dry out. And the rain isn't hitting with the same amount of force. And because you've got a mulch, and remember, you're not tilling this every year, you're just leaving it alone. You've got all of these different organisms moving around in the soil, creating tunnels, creating little everything. There's all these things moving around and they're making spaces and air in the soil. And you've got the plants you grew the previous year. Sometimes you pull the plants out of the ground, but sometimes you just cut them off. So they leave their roots in the ground, and that's leaving spaces. The roots break down and decompose it. So the soil gets it. I haven't tilled my garden ever. And
what about slugs?
You get a lot of slugs and snails. Okay, that's an excellent question. So yeah, you're keeping everything mulched all the time. So you're creating the ideal conditions for slugs and snails. You're creating a slug and snail heaven. They got all these great places to hide from their predators, right? Because and there's all this decaying organic matter, which they love. Not only do they like hiding under your mulch. They like the mulch. They eat it just as much as the worms do. So you do have the risk. And if you're planting anything that they really like, especially when those plants are young, they're exceptionally vulnerable. So you, like for kale, every brassica in the world, every brassica there is, kale, cabbage, collard greens, you name it, right? I have slugs and snails everywhere. Now, every single year I get more and more birds showing up in the spring to sort and look for them, right? But they don't do everything. So when I plant a row of kale, I put a little bit of, I use the kind of slug bait that the active ingredient's iron. The slug eats it, it just gets overdosed with iron and it dies. It doesn't eliminate the slugs from the area. It's just managing.
Gives you a barrier.
It protects the plants that need protecting.
Temporarily. Once the plant's about 6 inches high, I find they really don't do any damage to them. Also, the slugs are, think about a slug's mentality.
Really?
Oxymoron.
It can eat the foliage of the kale plant, but it can also eat the rotting mulch, right? The rotting mulch is just like yard waste and stuff like that, right? And which carries a higher risk, right? Once they climb up into that kale plant, the birds are there, nailing them, right?
Okay, that's interesting.
And they're averse to light, so they might attack your kale at night, but not during the day. So once the kale are a certain size, I don't use anything, right? I just leave them alone. And there's a little bit of slug damage here and there, but it's really not, I mean, it would be a problem if you were a commercial grower because everything has to look perfect, right? But there's a tiny bit of damage, but not a lot, especially if you keep them spaced out really well. The slugs, only the most intrepid slugs. Also, once
and they deserve it.
once the kale plant gets, like if using kale as an example, once it gets a certain size, the stem is tree-like. It's really hard and woody sort of thing. So a slug, remember, the slug's just feeling its way along the ground. It's going to go for anything it feels tender that smells right. When it comes across that kale stem, it's just going to keep moving for something better because it's not what it's looking for.
So you don't waste good beer on the slugs, I take it.
On the scale I'm gardening at, I couldn't. I mean, I'd have to have about 50 slug traps, right?
I just need to point out that slugs actually prefer cheaper beer.
Oh, they do.
They prefer Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, this was a study from years ago, and I think it has to do with it's based on rice, Pabst Blue Ribbon, the way they make it, and that's what slugs prefer.
Well, there you go. I'm not feeding that to my slugs.
The other thing about
I was going to ask you about the mulch. Okay, go ahead.
One more point. The other thing about the mulch and the slugs and the snails is that you want them there. They are turning your mulch into slug and snail poop. And that slug and snail poop is manure, and it's better than any manure you can buy. I mean, it's equivalent to worm castings in terms of from your plant's point of view, right? So the fact that you have a large population of slugs and snails, it's a problem you have to manage when your plants are young. There's a lot of plants that are slug and snail proof. I find they never bother my spinach, never bother my lettuce, and not in any meaningful way, right? It's brassicas and a handful of other things when they're really young. Other than that, a lot of plants like a squash or something like that, when it's really tiny, it's vulnerable. Once the second and third set of leaves come out, it becomes all spiny and they don't go near it.
Well, I wish they'd leave my hostas alone. I'll have to train them to only go after them when they're young or something like that. But what about the mulch? I mean, it is breaking down all the time. Do you replenish it with anything, or is it just the waste from the previous year? Oh,
your questions are like the perfect segue to the next thing I want to. Every single question you have is the next thing I want to talk about.
There we go.
So every fall, I work in the city. I have to drive into town every day, and instead of going down like the main highways, I tend to take the side streets to get around stuff. And in the fall, all the people in the city bag up their leaves and their yard waste, and they put it in these big paper bags and leave it at the end of the driveway. So so people in Halifax see this guy in dress clothes, competitive his little Kia Forte, and put it in his trunk. Sometimes they even put it in the back seat, right?
How about you kind of garbage man?
Exactly. What's this
guy garbage man?
This guy's lost his mind. So I'll just get every trip when I see these, I have a certain routes I take, right? So the street's really good for stuff like this, right? The streets. And I even have particular people I know, they like some of them, they some people rake their leaves, but the best people, the most the most courteous people, they mow their leaves, and it's all
And
bagged.
then rake them, yeah.
Oh,
Or put them in the bag, yeah.
It's got leaves and grass in it, so it's got like a carbon nitrogen mix. It's like the greatest stuff, right? Also, like large leaves, when you mulch with them, they tend to blow away. So you want the mower, it tends to make it all clumped together, right? So I gather bag after bag after bag of that all fall. And every single bed, as it finishes up, I'll cover a 4x8 bed might get 1 or 2 bags like that. So at least 3 inches of mulch over everything. And I do that every fall. And then when the spring rolls around, for the most part, most of that mulch is still there because it really doesn't break down that much over the winter. It's it does a little bit of decomposing in October, November, but it's just getting colder and colder every day. Everything shuts down. So I still get a good amount of that. Luckily for me, around this time of year, everybody gets out and starts raking those people that didn't rake their leaves in the fall, like, because I could use about 5 more bags right now. Someone's going to provide that for me. It's going to happen. If it doesn't happen, I'll just mow my lawn and take my stuff off, right? I've got a septic field back here. I always say to the kids, I normally use a mulching blade on my mower, but we have a septic field we live in a rural area. We have a septic field, and I never worry about the septic field having enough nitrogen. So I'll put the bag on and take the grass from the septic field. The grass always grows great there. And so I'll tell the kids, like, we mow the grass our poop goes in the septic field, and then I take the grass and put it in the garden, and that makes a beet, and we're eating our own poop.
Remember that story when you were little, Shauna, and I told you when people die, the cows come and eat them. They turn into a daisy, and the cows come and eat them. So there you go. It's the same story.
The same thing. But yeah, so that's the cycle of it. I don't generate enough on my property here for the size of garden. I've got about the equivalent of 54x8 beds back there, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask you how big your garden is. What do you do with all that produce?
I eat it all.
You do?
We eat all of it.
How much would you say your grocery bill is reduced per year? Or I don't know if you've always done it. Maybe you have no idea.
No, so I even did a podcast called The Economic Impact of Gardening, and I just vaguely estimated it, right? So I would say if you average it over the year, our grocery bill is reduced by, maybe, certainly in the summer it's reduced by because we eat a lot of vegetables. In the summer it's reduced by $40 a week at least.
Wow.
Maybe even more. I mean, I tend to undervalue things, right? Because when I have my garden, I grow like 250 heads of garlic, and it lasts us till maybe March, right?
Wow.
And we eat garlic. We eat a couple heads of garlic every single week, right? So 250 heads of garlic, organic, big fat, beautiful organic garlic would cost a lot of money. I grow so much kale that we eat kale 2-3 times a week. And I mean a big pile of it, like a mess of greens sort of thing, right?
Do you cook them or do you eat them raw, like in a salad?
I cook them, yeah.
Do you? I like them raw.
You can get more into you if you cook them because they compress, right?
Well, you look very healthy.
Yeah, well, we put like garlic and things like that in it. But yeah, so we eat a lot, like a ridiculous amount of kale. And I start pulling it out of the garden in maybe July. But we're eating it until March. It runs out in March. I'll take a bowl about this big of kale and blanch it very quickly, and it'll turn into a cake, about like a 1-pound cake of kale. And put that in the freezer. And we just take those out, and we have maybe 2 of those a week. And the carrots. I'm still eating last year's potatoes. I still have I get a lot of preserves as well. But most of the things I grow, I try to. I find preserves are labor intensive, right? So I like to grow things that you can just stick somewhere and eat later. So I actually
freezing them.
Freezing, but also just things that store well, like potatoes.
Yeah,
so I would say maybe a 2,500 square foot garden, but maybe a quarter of that's potatoes, maybe 1/5, right? I devote a good amount of real estate to squash, because squash, you literally cut it off, stick it on a shelf. I got one squash. The variety is called Sweet Mama. Last Sunday, I realized I'd forgotten that I had 2 of them in the garage. So we ate one of them last week, tasted great. I got one more to eat, right? It's April and I'm eating squash that I picked in September.
So what do you do between April and June?
We buy stuff.
Yeah. Do you grow fruit as well? Apples and pears?
Yeah, I've got an apple tree. This year I'm putting in a pear tree. I'm a bit, I don't know what the proper word is, hesitant to go too overboard with the fruit trees because we're not going to live here forever. I think somewhere in roughly 10 years, we're going to move. My wife wants to live in another part of the province when we retire.
You're going to get a condo?
Oh, no, we're going to.
No,
I'm kidding.
Hell no. No way. So, like that's one of the conditions. It has to be a place big enough for me to have a substantial garden because otherwise, how am I going to keep from going crazy? That's what I like to do. And also I've just, got a YouTube channel, that sort of stuff.
But what do you do in your non-gardening life?
I'm an avid angler. I'm a tinkerer. I'm trying to write a book.
You have a job though too, right?
I have a full-time job.
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah, how can you have a full-time job with all that gardening going on?
I don't sleep a lot, I guess. I'm work for the provincial government as in a role which would be entitled a senior policy analyst.
Oh, that's
so
good.
I write documents to the minister saying, I think we should do this, and this is why, and this is how much it'll cost, sort of thing. So yeah, sort of professional analyst and writer, I guess, in my day-to-day life when I'm not,
yeah, well, and I know why you can do that, because when you're in the garden, your mind just sort of like everything happens and things sort of sort themselves out, and you come in and you write, and it's just great, right?
Yes, well, and the garden provides a fantastic contrast to that world.
It does. It really does.
I'm in a cubicle all day writing documents,
Yeah.
And then I'm out there and the birds are singing and there's things whizzing around, the sun's there, and it's just that's where you feel alive. It's nothing like it. Nothing like being in a garden.
Absolutely.
Okay, this has been a great talk. We only talked a little bit about extending the garden season, but that's okay. We learned so much. I didn't get the second or the third break-in. That's also okay. And I want to thank you so much. We'll have to have you back and talk more about whatever it is we talk about.
Okay.
I want to thank you, Mom, you, Greg, and I also want to thank the Government of Canada for giving us the funding to make this possible.
Oh, great.
Thank you so much, Greg, and thank you, Shauna. Bye.
Thanks, guys.